right, y'all. So this session is titled Reframing Female Athletes, Media Narratives, NIL Sponsorship, and the Fight for Equity, presented by Erin Crownover, PhD candidate, the University of Texas at Austin Kinesiology and Health Education Department, Lauren Rose, Assistant Director of Student Athlete Development at the University of Cincinnati, and Lizzi Smith, a Paralympic medalist in para-swimming, and Kiara, McClendon, Exceptional Sports and Entertainment. This presentation explores the evolution of media narratives around female athletes from Sports Illustrated and women's sports to today's social media-driven NIL era. Using framing theory, it examines how race, sexualization, ability, and class have shaped representation and opportunities. Insights include beauty and privilege in Olympics and Paralympic sectors, where attractiveness and disability types influence sponsorships. Discussions with NIL professionals highlight persistent inequalities and advocate for inclusive representation in sports and media. Take it away, girls.
Hi, can everybody hear us? Okay, great. So we're super excited to talk with you today. As we mentioned, we've got Erin Crownover, we've got Lorna, and we've got Lizzi. So all of us are excited to have this conversation with you. I think one of the best ways to introduce people is to allow them to frame or introduce themselves in a manner that is empowering to them. So Erin, though we know you are a PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Austin, who else are you, or how else would you frame your identity?
How many student athletes do we have in the room? Do we have some student athletes? Yes. I was also a student athlete, a Division II basketball player. That's definitely an identity, right, that I personally had held. I also am program manager for a company called Voice in Sport. It's a digital mentoring platform for girls 13 to 23 years old, because girls are dropping out at the rate by 14 years old by 95%. And so that's something else that I'm really passionate about. But yeah, I guess right now, really student, and I also work with the women's sports company.
Okay, awesome. And Lorna, what about you?
Hello, everybody. Nyaweske no swagwego. That's a traditional salutation that my people use to greet a crowd. I'm a Cayuga woman from the Haudenosaunee Nation. That's a very important piece of my identity and something that I stand on very proudly. Outside of being the Assistant Director of Student Athlete Development at University of Cincinnati, I'm a mentor, I'm an auntie to my actual nieces and nephews and to my 400 plus student athletes that I get to work with. And most importantly, I am a dog mom. So those are probably the most important things you need to know about me and who I am.
And Lizzi, what about you?
I'm Lizzi Smith. I'm a 3-time Paralympic swimmer. I started swimming kind of the classic way people end up in sports. I started when I was 7, but I had no idea what the Paralympics was until I was 12. So I'm super excited about this conversation today because I actually found out about the Paralympics from watching Disney Channel on the segment Check This Kid Out when I saw Jessica Long swimming. So it shows the power of media because that opened my door to all the dreams that I didn't think was possible with one hand.
I love that. And just to give you perspective, I'm Kiara McClendon. I run my own company, so I'm an entrepreneur, and I work with current and former athletes to empower them in life outside of sport. I want to make sure that all of you who are athletes are successful in your athletic identity, but also outside of that identity when life transitions you to a new place. So I'm really excited to talk with these ladies and to empower you in the conversation that we're having. What we did just now was a little bit of framing, and there's some theory behind that. So Erin, could you share a little bit about framing theory and why that's important for our conversation today?
Yeah, absolutely. So framing theory, it may sound like the word frame. It's really what perspective does the media portray on a person, on a situation, and that influences us as consumers, our perspective. And so with each of us just introducing ourselves, how we each framed ourselves, like I was very more general than Lorna, right? Like, and I'm also like a sister, right? I have a partner, a daughter, all these other things as well. But it's really important because women, I don't know if I should go into like the historicalness of it, but like women historically are framed in the media as more fragile and more of an attraction than male athletes. And so it's really important. The media tells us stories, right? And that's how we portray information. So maybe I'll leave it at that first. But
Yeah. I think To kind of add to what Erin is saying, or just to get you all to think about what she's saying, for a second, take a second and think about the way that the media shapes narratives around women. Can anybody give me an example, or give us an example of a stereotype that you see of women in the media, and then we can talk about some of the historical perspective and where that comes from. You want to raise your hand and share? Yes. Yeah, sure. Yes, in sports. So women athletes. Okay. Yep. Anyone else?
I had done this project in grad school where we looked at some different pictures of like a men's basketball team versus a women's basketball team, and looked at the pictures of them that were being portrayed in media. And every single one of the pictures of the men was like fierce, like throwing, like whatever it was. And it was just like, and the women's pictures were all smiling and joking and passing the ball nicely to each other. And like, there was maybe one crossover with both of those, but it was very interesting how different both of those were.
Sure. So Erin, where does that stem from? Like historically, where do we even begin to see women portrayed in the media, women athletes more specifically, portrayed in the media, and like why do we see those stereotypes?
Yeah, no, great question, and I appreciate the answers, because there is kind of this one perception of the quote ideal female image, whether it's in sports or also just in everyday life, right? Going back to like give it like a little historical kind of lesson here, but I think it's really important to understand where we lead up to today, where Lizzi and Lorna will shed more light on present day women in the media. But in the 1940s is when there was this gymnastic movement, Muscle Beach, California. I don't know if we've heard of it, and there was a woman named Pudgy Stockton. She was called the Queen of Barbells, and that was like the first time a woman was really featured on the cover of a magazine. So this was obviously way before internet, or not way before, but what we have today, movie scene. And so she was the first woman she was on the cover for Strength and Health magazine, 40 issues of those. And she was the first woman to be shown in a bikini. And that's kind of where the sexualization started, because initially it was about her physical training. There's a physical culture movement, but then we placed her in a bikini, and she turned from an athlete more to now this attraction. And then when we skip to the 1950s, 1954, when Sports Illustrated, which is a predominantly male-centered focused magazine, came about, they tried doing, just a side note, they tried doing a Sports Illustrated for women in 1997, but it ended in 2002, so it was very short-lived. But when we think of Sports Illustrated, like, what do we think about? Like, bikinis, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The Sports Illustrated, like, we still see that today, right? And what's interesting, where they were looking at female athletes historically in a lot of these 50, 60, 70 issues, they were taking female athletes and modeling it after the Playboy. So Hugh Hefner's Playboy, and what readers could write in and ask for, like, we want to see this athlete in a nude pictorial or in this type of pictorial. So that's how we were framing women athletes. Jump then to the 60s, when women were really allowed to take another step further within sports, and we have Wilma Rudolph and Catherine Switzer, two individuals I'll call out, but Wilma is an African-American woman, and there's a term that I could go as well deep, but she was categorized African-American versus Black in these magazines, and she's an Olympic just hero, right? And a badass athlete, but she was only ever talked about in terms of her race. And so a lot of articles titled her like Black Speed on the way to the Olympics, right? Versus a white woman would be categorized as dolls on the move, like to Mexico, when it was like the Mexico Olympics. And so kind of looking at the verbiage there. Catherine Switzer, she really stepped over this barrier with the marathon, the Boston Marathon. And so, but what was advertised was her fighting like the officials, and not actually like her racing and her athleticism. And then jump a little bit forward, 1970s, we have 1972 Title IX. We have Billie Jean King. She created the first time there was a women's sports magazine dedicated, written by women for the women athlete. But then what was really still noted, though, by the rest of society was Billie Jean King and the Battle of the Sexes instead. And so, and then not her athleticism, but then again, how she was playing against a male, Bobby Riggs, in that famous tennis match. And so I think then where we kind of jump to some stats, I'm going to look here just at my phone because I think these are really interesting. In the 1970s, there was no press coverage of women at all, and we have high school female athletes, less than 8% of women in America were playing. College female athletes, only 15%. From the 1980 to 2000s, high school female athletes, there was 3 million. College female athletes, only 43% of the college population, but there was still not like press coverage in general. From 2010 to 2018, female high school athletes, there were 40%, college female athletes, 43%, but still less than 5% of airtime. Jumping to today, so 2018, less than 5%. Today, now it's still only 15% of media coverage is dedicated exclusively to women athletes in sports. And I know we had a big year last year, but that's still an incredibly small number. So where do we go to see sports and women?
Sure. One, you're educating me, so thank you for those stats. I really appreciate that. But also, I want to open it up to all the ladies. Like, beauty is such a subjective thing, but the media has such a large influence on how beauty is shaped or how it's categorized for all of us to consume. So how can we look at the intersectionalities of different parts of people's identity and call out some of the way that the media is shaping how we look at beauty? For example, if you are a woman of color, or more specifically a black woman, a Hispanic American woman, a Native woman, if you are a woman that has a disability, or if you are a person that is of a certain age, like how do we look at all those things and call attention to the complexities of how beauty is talked about in the media? Whoever wants to go. You wanna go?
Well, for the starting point is what we see is what we believe. So representation is still the biggest thing, especially as a female with a disability. I didn't know that I was eligible for the Paralympics until I saw someone who kind of sort of looked like me, even her disability was different. So we need to see females who represent us. That's also the power of sport. That's why we have all these idols, is because we see something in them that we feel like resonates with us. We see ourselves in them, but a lot of us are left with no one that looks like us. So I feel like that's the biggest place to start.
I can definitely identify with that feeling of people don't see anyone who looks like me, because in the media, the only representation there are of Native women is Pocahontas and cheap three-piece costumes at Party City once a year, right? So it is very important when we talk about representation, but we can't control how the media represents us, right? And going back to something that Erin mentioned with the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition, I do have to give a shout out to Sports Illustrated for taking a much different spin on it this year. They featured, it was either 4 or 5 college athletes, female college athletes. One of them is our own University of Cincinnati's Jillian Hayes from our women's basketball team. And the biggest thing that I learned from her experience participating in that was it was extremely empowering for her, because she was finally put in a space where she didn't need to be ashamed of her body. She didn't need to feel embarrassed about having an athletic body as a woman. And when we talk about how we used to just throw them in bikinis and call it a day because it's #entertainment, I have a lot of history with the Miss America organization. I was a former title holder way back when, and then I spent several years coaching and mentoring. The Miss America organization started out as a bathing beauties contest. They put a bunch of women in swimsuits and lined them up on the boardwalk in Atlantic City to extend the tourist season. Fast forward a few years, they decided, no, we're not doing that. Our women are worth so much more than their bodies. And then the Vanessa Williams scandal happens. Vanessa Williams was our first Black Miss New York, our first Black Miss America, and she was stripped of her title because photos were taken of her that were partially nude photos that were published without her consent. But that was something that was taken away from the first Black woman that's ever achieved that status and achieved that accomplishment because they didn't want that image out there. And so it's the fact that it happened to a Black woman is what we do need to focus on when you talk about what's the intersection of beauty and these other identifying characteristics. We know that Black women and women of color have to fight so much harder for acceptance, especially when they don't fit Eurocentric beauty standards. Current athlete, one that my mind always goes to, one of my favorite athletes, Sha'Carri Richardson. She very successfully kind of adopted the FloJo styling with the nails and with the hair, and ever since she started running, every time, especially the track and field events at the Olympics, whenever we see Black women running, their hair looks amazing, their makeup looks amazing, their nails look amazing, and there's a million people out there who want to denigrate them and say that they're wrong for showing up to their sport in that way, as if there's any one way that an athlete or a woman is supposed to look to compete in their sport. So I do love that now, present day, we have social media, so we have a collective voice that we can all jump on and contribute to those conversations. It's not just an echo chamber of the execs that decide who goes on the covers or the, marketing agencies who decides who they're gonna cast as models. We all kind of get to decide, nope, we love these women, we love the way that they look, even if it's not what you all are used to, but it's important that we keep that conversation going by calling it out.
Sure. Just to kind of add perspective, or just to round out some of what you're saying, as a Black woman myself, and as a person who has worked in sports for over 10 years, I think it's important for us to see the representation of the colorful hair, the natural hair, the nails, and the way in which you want to express yourself, because it challenges those social norms, as you mentioned. I'm sure everybody in here saw how terribly they talked about Sha'Carri Richardson, and how terribly they talked about Angel Reese and others, particularly as we saw the rise of NIL, with them just expressing who they are. But if you reflect back to the conversation earlier today, NIL is who you are. And the opportunities that you get in the NIL space are aligned, or should be aligned, with your brand, right? So that brings us into the modern day conversation of NIL. How do we see a shift in that portrayal of beauty, whether that be a positive shift or in some cases even a negative shift around our women athletes and how they're portrayed?
So this is what I see. So in my role, I work very closely with our student athletes at Cincinnati on life after sport, or life outside sport rather, because that kind of education and development, it starts from the moment they walk through the doors as freshmen, right? So it's life outside sports. And I do work really closely with our NIL department because a lot of our work overlaps. What I see is the shift in beauty, at least among our athletes, it's less about the external. It really is more about the internal and finding ways to bring that forward. Like you said, beauty is subjective. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. But the most important beholder is your own eyes of yourself, right? What you see when you look in the mirror. What I see when I look in the mirror, sure, brown hair, tan skin, brown eyes, yay high. But what I show up as is intelligent, capable, driven, passionate advocate, compassionate person. And if I were a college athlete, I would be pursuing NIL deals and brand deals that align with who I am as a person, because those are the characteristics that I find to be most beautiful about myself. It doesn't matter what you think when you look at me. It doesn't matter if I'm attractive to you or if I'm your cup of tea. But what does matter to me is, do you think I'm a good person? Have I shown you who I am? Am I someone that you can relate to or believe in? And that, to me, is where I see the expression of beauty going, at least with my student athletes. Fun fact, our student athletes, the ones who have organic NIL brand deals, so that they partner with companies or organizations for deals around their name, image, and likeness, our highest earners are the women. There are women athletes, because they pursue these things in pursuit of their own personal and professional development. So that's a shift that I'm loving seeing. Is it's so much less about, oh, I want to deal with Maybelline, I want to deal with CoverGirl, or even I want the deal with Nike, I want the jewelry store deal. No, they want to have deals that actually align with who they are and what their inner values are. And speaking of beauty, I just think that's beautiful.
One question I would ask you, Lizzie, is how have you seen Paralympic sport kind of shift the narrative around athlete representation and the beauty of Paralympic athletes?
Ooh, yeah. So we get pigeonholed a lot into our framing is we are inspirational. And then in female sport, we see athletes being sexualized. And then on the para side, desexualized, really. So then another area that we also have to kind of fall onto with how we show up in media that I'm observing is we also have to be funny. All these things that kind of are kind of objectifying, take away from the multifaceted person that we are. And where I want to bring the attention back to who we are as athletes is because sport is the best microcosm for humans. You get to see so much vulnerability, how people respond to triumphs and tragedy. So seeing that more in the narrative, seeing like beauty is how people fall and how they get back up. Beauty is their impact on the people around them.
You kind of touch on it, but I think an overarching thing that we need to think about is that women are still being hypersexualized in these spaces, but then they're also being compared to those who are represented in masculine spaces. So how do you hypersexualize a group, but then also compare them to masculine identities, right? It's not, you don't fit in that box, right? You are your own person. You're not a man, you're a woman. You're not someone that needs to be sexualized. You can still be, and quite frankly, may even be more inspirational to someone else based on who you are, based on those qualities that you have. So I think that's extremely important, and we should continue to challenge that, right?
Yeah, and really look at the way we have it set up right now is there's no winning for a female athlete. So what are we buying? Are we buying appearance? I think that needs to shift more to let's pay for impact.
Yep. And think about it as less of the entertainment factor and more of the I'm watching you showcase your skill set. I like you because you're a great athlete, not because your hair is pretty. Though that might be a great thing that we bond over, like I'm impressed by you because of your skill. So I think that's a great shift. Staying in the modern times as it relates to NIL, how has the representation or lack thereof of representation in the NIL space, impacted athletes' mental health? Mental health is a huge topic, so I think it's really important for us to touch on that as well.
Absolutely. This is the Big 12 Student Athlete Mental Health Week right now that we're in the middle of, so perfect timing to talk about this. I would say, when I asked our NIL director, what's the biggest challenge with our women student athletes in getting engaged in NIL activities, he said, they're so worried about what the people back home will think about them. And I do see some heads nodding, so I think that's a fear and kind of a concern that we can all resonate with, because let's face it, we all knew a mean girl in high school, right? I doubt it's anyone in this room, but we all knew one, and perhaps we were subject to her treatment or her, mistreatment, and so we remember those things when we think about putting ourselves out there. Oh, no, there's going to be a detractor, there's going to be hatred, there's going to be negative, and that affects your mental health in the sense that a lot of student athletes, not necessarily Cincinnati, but in general, a lot of student athletes who now have the opportunity to get NIL deals, they're beginning to equate their value and their worth to the number of deals that they get, or the value of the deals, or the brands that they partner up with. And that is something that I'm very proud of, the institution I work in. We have an extremely supportive department. We really approach NIL for our student athletes as professional and personal development, not just, hey, here's a way you can make money, make all the money you can, make the money, make the money. Sure, money is great. It's, it's how we pay the bills. But we need to be mindful, and you all need to be mindful, all the young women in this room, be mindful of how you're exchanging your internal resources for that compensation in these brand deals. A $10 deal where you get paid $10 per post that you make for a brand, that is just as valuable as the teammate of yours that gets paid $10,000 to put up one post. And it's because a brand saw you and said, we want to partner with you. And when it comes to NIL, the advice that we like to give is, who do you want to partner with? What is a company that you want to align yourself with? That gives you a little bit more control, and it makes you feel like you're driving that train rather than chasing the NIL train, just trying to hop on wherever you can so you can say that you did NIL. We really want you all to approach that kind of engagement with a sense of conviction in yourself, and not, if I don't get this NIL deal, then I'm not as good as my teammates, or I'm not as good of as a business person as anybody else. And that's important, is not tying brand deals or dollar signs to your internal worth. That is something that I just want to put out there, because that's very, very important in this conversation.
Erin, I'm going to bring it back to you. So how many people in here are student athletes, if you could just raise your hand, if you don't mind? So we've got a couple. So if the student athletes that are in the room, they're meeting with a brand that has an interest in working with them. Let's say this brand has an interest in amplifying their relationship in the media. What advice would you give to them on how to handle that conversation so that they're represented in the media, or framed in the media the way that they would want to be framed?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it kind of stemming off something both Lizzie and Lorna said is, I guess first, like, what do you want to be represented for, like your impact, right? And I think it's really having confidence in yourself and what impact that you want to be represented by. I think we can definitely fall in the trap. Like, I'm not a current student athlete, and I'm actually not on Instagram anymore, but when I was, it's really, for me as a basketball player, like, who's heard of the Cavender twins? Like, I'm not shaming, right? I'm not shaming them at all, but it's hard not to fall into, like, what are the products that they are using to have that type of body, right, as a female, and I'm tall and bigger than them, right? So it's like, how do they look like this? What do they eat? How do they get to work with these types of clothing companies, et cetera? It's hard not to fall in that comparison trap. So I think my advice would be, like, one, don't fall in that comparison trap, and, like, think about what you believe in and the impact that you really want to make. Because at the end of the day, you're not only influencing, like, yourself and the people around you, but you're also, like, a mentor for other people to come, for other young girls. And so I think maybe asking yourself too, what would the younger version of, like, Erin or myself, what would I, like, want to see in them as well? So maybe that's a more humanistic approach, but I think it reflects a lot of what we see systemically in our society, and maybe, like, consumerism as a whole. But that's the advice I would give.
Sure, yeah.
And I would say, on top of when you're pitching yourself, like, you show up with your stats on your followers, your engagement, but also pitch what your impact is. Pitch how you're a mentor and how that their brand connection to you is going to actually reach the community in face-to-face interactions. I think that's a super valuable thing to pitch as well.
I want to follow up with a short anecdote on that, Lizzie. That's an excellent point. One of our student athletes last year, she had a brand deal with Clinique, and she was given a whole ton of samples. And so after giving them out to her teammates and some of the other student athletes, she arranged with her coaches to put together an event in December, so a pre-Christmas event, holiday event, where a bunch of teenagers and high schoolers, young women in the Cincinnati area came, and she gave out the rest of her samples of Clinique products to all these teenagers. And it was just something that she chose to do, but she was one of our highest performing, student athletes with regard to NIL, because she always had the mindset of, how can I use this to help other people? So when Lizzie talked about impact, and when Erin talked about what would the younger version of you have wanted to see, I think this one athlete was an incredible example of doing good and doing well.
I think you all have touched on, or specifically Erin, you touched on just the balance that athletes need to strike between comparison and influence, and then identification. So I can look at an ad and say, oh my gosh, this person is taller than I am, thinner than I am, thicker than whatever it is I'm looking at, and compare myself to them. I can look at an ad and say, wow, this made their hair look great, and so it's gotta work for my hair, knowing it's probably not gonna work for my hair, right? Or I can look at it and say, this intrigues me. I'm interested in knowing what this brand is about. I'm interested in knowing what this product line is, and then make the decision based on information on what to do next, right? And I think We have to be careful as athletes, more specifically as you all decide to enter into these NIL deals just for the simple fact that you're getting paid to do it. Think about what you want to influence people to do or not to do based on the deals that you have, right? You don't want to just pick something just because it pays you a lot of money. And I think Reggie was saying that earlier. You want to pick something that aligns with who you are, that allows to amplify more of your personality or your influence or your impact, as you mentioned, and just be really mindful of that, because we all know people, we all follow people on social media that every day they're posting another brand. And it's like, do you even use this? Is this even something that, I know you're not using these Cutco knives, no disrespect to Cutco. I know you're not using them because you don't even cook, and I know that because I know you, right? So I think you have to be mindful of that as well. I think as we are just thinking critically and thinking to the future, if we were talking to the media right now, what are some of the things that you all would want to say to the media to ensure that they're doing a better job of representing women athletes in a better way? Maybe, Lizzie, you could even speak on that as an athlete yourself.
Well, it's actually, it's kind of future-proofing your company. So you can even say, like, it's actually making you money to invest in women's sports. It's making you money to invest in disability sports, because that's 15% of the population, 1 billion people, plus the other 7 billion also benefit from it. So you can look at numbers of, yes, invest, obviously, duh, and then also go to the human level, because with a disability, anyone can become disabled at any time. So it's not just you don't know anyone, you could know someone, it could be you. So there's a social investment that needs to happen as well. So yeah, future-proof your company, get involved.
If I could address the media, I think I would really like them to stop trying to draw women athletes off sides with their questions. We've seen all the clips, not sports specific, but interviewing a celebrity on a red carpet. I believe it was Taylor Swift, and they asked, "Who are you going home with tonight?" And she said, "I'm going home to my cats." And I felt that as a dog mom. And I know there's a clip of Rihanna being asked something similarly out of pocket and constantly distracting. Like Erin said before, when we talked about Catherine Switzer, she's a fellow Orange woman, shout out to her. They focus more on the fact that she was fighting off the officials as she was running, not the fact that this woman just completed the Boston Marathon as the first woman to do it. So I would love for the media to stop playing those games with our women athletes, stop trying to draw them off sides, stop trying to distract from what you're even talking to them about in the first place, which is their skill, which is their exceptional talent, which is the contributions that they lend to our consumption of sports. You know, like Lizzie said, it's the perfect microcosm. Sports really does bring everybody together. It's an extremely hardcore American value, and I love being a part of it. But we need to treat this entire half of it so much better, and that really does start with the media.
I agree. Ditto to what they both said, and Lorna and Lizzie. And also, I say that I would tell the media that they really have the opportunity to change the narrative themselves. They are the storytellers, right? And they have a chance to make it real and authentic and a personal connection that can be impactful. And again, that sounds very humanistic, but if you know that you have that ability to change that narrative through the art of storytelling, and that's beautiful. We see so many, we all probably have our own favorite book, podcast, video that hypes you up or whatever it is. Mine's a Nike commercial that's for women's equity, but I think it's just really placing that in knowing that there can be a confidence. It's not always what maybe the most attractive thing, and it may not gain a lot of attention or attraction right away, because we all feed into wanting the latest gossip. The tabloids is, someone with who or not, divorced, whatever it is. But just I think going back to being a human, and I don't know, I agree with what y'all said, but I think just that impact and authentic connection.
I also, just to add perspective, think that everyone in here who has a social media page, you are an extension of the media. So you have the ability to control what narrative is put out there about you because you can do it yourself, right? So you see those who have large platforms on TikTok, on Instagram, on these other social media websites, and we see exactly how they want to be represented, right? So the more that you can use social media as a tool to control your own narrative, like, please do. I think that that is extremely important. And I think, yes, we can all consume social media. I can sit 5 hours on TikTok like the best person in here. But I think if you are able to shape how you want other people to see you, it's extremely powerful. And then it also, the media is kind of stupid, for lack of a better word. No disrespect to the media, but they follow what we do. So if you start to shape how the media sees you, and you take control of the narrative and you continue to promote that, the media is going to follow because that's what's popular, that's what got you the followers, that's what's influencing people to do certain things, whether that's buy a product or go to an event. So, like, you all have way more control over the media than what we sometimes think about. So I think that's important as well. One question I have for the panel, there are a couple of guys in the room, right? And a lot of our conversation has been from the perspective of women or about women, but as individuals who can be allies in this fight, particularly as it relates to advocating for women or challenging the media, challenging those social norms. What advice would we give to the guys on how to be a great ally or what we would want?
I think for me, it would be kind of just reflect on like your language. And for example, something, again, I'm a basketball junkie, but why do we say WNBA versus NBA? Why is it not MNBA? And so I think just taking into account, like, how are we talking about women's sports leagues versus men's sports leagues? So that would be my take.
Shout out to Rakia Jackson, who has gone on record to say, I don't watch the MNBA. So feel free to adopt that, everybody. And it can be the MNBA. There's no reason why it doesn't have to be. For the men in the room, as far as being allies, two things. Speaker earlier, the CEO of A Long Talk, he said, shake the vibe up, shake the tension up, check your friends, check your homeboys. These things aren't jokes. The other thing I would like to challenge you all to do, or ask you all to do rather, is be really intentional about using the word female versus woman. I know that, you know, the title of this is female athletes. There are, in certain circumstances, very good reasons why we use the word female instead of women. But in general, we are women. Female is a scientific designation, and we are so much more than what our chromosomes are or what our reproductive organs are. We are women. We are not girls. We may be ladies to like our grandmas and our aunties, but we are women. And so I would love for the men in the room to really think about, next time you want to refer to women as females, think about why that word, and maybe step outside your comfort zone and go with women.
In honor of the Super Bowl coming up, there's no bananas culture more than like NFL following. Like my boyfriend for the Ravens, he morphs into this crazy super fan. So I would say for the men, help us create that culture by engage in social media, ask for them to play a women's sports game when you're at a bar. Like, engage as much as you can. But I think that's when things are really going to blow up, is when we create this culture around the sport.
Sure. I think it starts also with what men do when no one's watching. It starts with what you think. It starts with what you say in the comfort of your own spaces amongst your friend groups, and then it extends out into those public spaces. So if you have a bias or there's a sense of ignorance around women and you continue to think that, it becomes so much easier to say it. It becomes so much easier to show that. So check yourself before someone has to check you, right? Before it becomes something that you're saying outwardly, like, think about it in your own independent spaces. That is a reflection on your character, not just your ability to be a great ally to women. So I would challenge men to start within first and then build without. Does that make sense? And none of this is an attack on men. We just have a right to say, hey, this is how we want to be talk to. This is how we want you all to support us. This is how we want you to listen. And if there's an opportunity for us to do that for y'all, we want to hear that as well. Like, in order for us to control the narrative, you have to listen to what we're saying. That's when it becomes a narrative, when we speak about it and then you respond to what we're speaking about. So as a little bit of a revolutionary myself, I want to ask the ladies, like, how do we keep the momentum going in this conversation and start a revolution? Like, what steps can we encourage the audience to take, these young ladies and young men, young people in this room, or those who are young at heart? How do we get them to mobilize so that what we're saying doesn't just sound great at this conference, but is actually put into action?
Create the snowball. Everyone who's here today, write it down, talk to 3 other friends who aren't here about what you learned, and then just make it spread throughout your community, and then we go bigger and bigger from there.
So we're going to do a short, very short activity. Sorry, gentlemen, this is for the women in the room. So sports or not, one of the ways we can keep the momentum going when we're talking about framing is it is up to us, as Kiara said, to reframe, right? We need to recalibrate not just the way that people talk about us or talk about you all as athletes, but how we talk about and think about ourselves. So one thing that I always challenge a group of women to do when I'm speaking in front of them is, as a collective, now when I greeted you all earlier in the Seneca language, what that loosely translates to is, I'm glad you all are here and you're all well, because we are so much better as a community. Community care is so important, and as a collective, that's where we find the power to shake things up and make things happen. So as a collective today, everyone in this room is going to stop apologizing for things that we are not sorry for, okay? When we're talking about framing and reframing, we need to step outside of this box that society has tried to shove us in and keep us in. A speaker earlier brought up the, terrible societal idea that women belong in the kitchen, right? We need to reframe those things. And one way we can do that is to stop apologizing and stop shrinking ourselves. So I want everyone to get it out of their systems real quick. On the count of 3, everyone's gonna say sorry for the last time, okay? 1, 2, 3.
Sorry.
What are we gonna stop saying?
Sorry.
Because what are we not?
Not sorry.
There we go.
That deserves a clap, I feel. I think I challenge you all, I think besides like language and what we filter, like I love what was said about like checking yourself first, like language, what are you following on social media? It's also physically going to an event. Shout out to CU Boulder Women's Basketball playing tonight. There's an easy one if anyone's free. Go to an actual event and support women in the stands. Be like active. Go to I think also the sporting events that are not popular on your campus in whatever sport that may be. And then I think also finally to like invest in like the relationships close to you, female or woman friends, sisters, cousins, whatever it may be, and like invest in their lives and like what they're a part of. And I think just being physically present besides like our language and our actions on social media and our own power of storytelling, it's the power of being physically present as well.
I'll just close and then maybe we can open up for some questions if you all have questions. But every woman that's in here was meant to be in this room and every other room that you enter in from now until forever. Anytime you enter a space, you're supposed to be there, whether your hair is natural or straight, blue, black, green, whether you're tall, skinny, whatever, however you define yourself, whatever you look like, whatever your beauty standards are for yourself, you are meant to be in that room. If nobody else ever tells you that, just remember I told you that. If you never see me again, if I like disappear into the abyss, you heard me say, you belong, right? I think there are so many spaces that try to get us to think that we don't, and we do, and we always will. The world is a better place because women are in it. So I'll close with that, and if anybody has any questions, let us know.
I think we got time. We got one Zoom question for you guys. So the Zoom question is, with the ever-changing collegiate athletics landscape, what trends to change What trends or changes do you all foresee in the NIL space? What can women athletes do now to stay ahead of the curve?
We are seeing lots of things changing. What women athletes can do to stay ahead of the curve, it's really what Erin said, just show up. Be intentional about the kinds of activities you want to engage in. Be intentional about the spaces that you want to show up in. Do your research. There was a situation on a college campus where a speaker came, and it was a speaker who, it was about a topic that's a little controversial, and they were asking everybody who attended this speaker's presentation to sign waivers of their NIL. And so there was a huge crowd of college students who had no idea that they had just given permission to this person to use photos of them. If they said anything to anyone, they could record that statement and reproduce it in whatever way best served that speaker. And I mean, support the things you support, of course, but do your research. Lean on your resources. Don't just sign a deal because it'll get you money. You should understand what some of those terms and those contracts are. Again, when I said our approach at the University of Cincinnati, it's very much from a professional and personal development perspective. I don't care if you don't ever sign an NIL deal or make a single penny from it, but if you attended one of our workshops, you know what those terms and those contracts means, because our NIL department is going to teach you what those mean. And that will serve you beyond college. That's for job contracts. That's for business agreements. That's for any kind of agreement you might enter into. You can start building those skills now, not just because of NIL, but because you finally have an opportunity to make money in exchange for what you give up as an athlete. So if you want to get involved in that, lean on your resources, do your research, and that is how you'll really be able to capitalize, for lack of a better word, on these opportunities and not kind of just get caught under the current of the wave, because this wave is not going to slow down anytime soon.
Sure. I'd like to also jump in here and just say we're going to continue to see a shift in athlete ownership, whether that be the creation of opportunities for athletes to have equity in the businesses that they're working with, whether that continue to be a shift in just the way in which the athlete leads the charge over how their NIL is utilized and how they capitalize off of that use. We've been very heavily in the influencer space, and I think that continues, but I also think as athletes become more awake and aware, they're going to want more control, more ownership, more equity, and more financial compensation as it relates to NIL. So we have to be intentional in our conversations. Financial literacy is a skill for life, regardless of what you do. It's not just having a conversation with a bank, or it's not just having a conversation one time about investing. It's for your entire life. So if you aren't already having those conversations or aren't already tackling that topic, it's important for people in the NIL space that has to be a part of the conversation to properly set the students up to be successful beyond whatever contract they're signing or beyond whatever time or the duration of that contract. NIL is an opportunity for women to build wealth. You might not get a lot of money in that current moment, or you might. $10,000 invested the right way leads to wealth. So I'll say that.
Thanks, team. Appreciate your time, energy, and attention. I will give you all time to ask questions, but we are at time. Couple things. One, thank you again for giving us insight around, I won't get into it because I'll be up here for 10 minutes, but some closing things. For those who are interested in going to the women's basketball game, there is going to be a walking group that is leaving here to go to the keynote fireside chat starting at 5:30. Actually, that's very unclear. There is a walking group that is leaving here in the next 5 minutes to go to the CUEC, the CU Event Center where our women's basketball team plays. If you would like to see the keynote fireside chat, it starts at 5:30 p.m. If you're interested, please meet us at the back door, and we will have a group walk over with you. If you are interested and you have a bag, the CU Event Center has a clear bag policy and a no bag policy. We have found a way to be able to maneuver around that, but you need to come see me if you have a bag and you want to go, okay? If you are not going to the CU Event Center for the game, thanks for joining us today. We definitely appreciate it, and we'll have a survey ready for you. And lastly, if you have questions for our presenters, I know a good chunk of them will be going. Please try to find some time with them, or come see me again and I can share their information. Can we give our panelists a last round of applause?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Again, if you're walking, meet us in the back corner, and we'll walk together.